Okay, so we're going to go right into it, and we're going to talk about applying for financial aid for the application year of 2020-21. So that's going to be this upcoming academic year. So for your high school seniors and anyone that's going to be going to college next year, right? So for today's agenda, we're going to be talking about types and sources of financial aid. So types mainly being grants, scholarships, loans to a degree, and then work study, things like that. And there's quite a few different variations of that right now, and there's going to be even more variations in the years to come, as there's quite a few pieces of legislation coming out to kind of make that a little bit more variedied. And then the sources of financial aid, those are mainly going to be the federal sources, the state sources, the institutional sources, which are going to be the colleges that students are attending, and then also private scholarships, which are given through organizations. So we're going to be talking about that into more detail. We're going to go directly into the applications, which are going to be mostly one-stop shops on applying for some of the really big aid. So that's what we're going to be doing at that point. And then we're going to be moving into ways to keep your aid. So there's certain things that students will have to do to ensure that they're keeping their aid, and what aid can be spent on. So certain financial aid can be spent towards tuition, to fees, and to a lot of other living expenses depending on those aid types. And I just want to kind of give a reminder to everyone, I did put everyone on mute, but you are able to unmute yourself. So if you do have questions, just unmute yourself and then go ahead and ask that question. And then we're going to finish it off by going over some resources. And once again, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, please let me know. I would be glad to answer any questions as they come up. And I'm pretty good, so if you feel like you can stump me on something, I really welcome the challenge. So we'll move right in to types of financial aid. So there are three main types of financial aid. There's the gift aid, which is oftentimes referred to as that free money. These are going to be your grants and scholarships. And so the main ones you've probably heard of are going to be like the Cal Grant, the Middle Class Scholarship, the Pell Grant, the Blue and Gold Scholarship, the CSU, which is the California State University Grant, things like that. This is money that does not have to be repaid, right? So that's a really important aspect behind if you receive any of these kinds of scholarships or grants, you usually want to accept them because you don't have to repay them. Now, there's the work financial aid, which is money that's earned by the student for payment of a job or, in some cases, services they provide. So a lot of it could be like community service moving into next year. That's one of those next year things for California DREAM Act applicants. So this is going to be mainly a job that's going to be on campus where they're able to work, the student's able to work around their school schedule. So on the FAFSA, it's going to ask for anyone that's a FAFSA filer if the student would like to be considered for work study. And we always recommend the student says, yes, I would like to be considered for work study. They don't have to accept a work study if it's offered to them. But if they do not say they want to be considered for it, they won't even be offered it. So please keep that in mind. And keep in mind that it's also not free money. So if you do select work study, it is essentially a job that's going to be on campus or around campus that's flexible with your schedule. And then there are student loans. This is borrowed money that has to be paid back, usually with interest. This is not free money, and it's really important to understand the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Subsidized loans are usually the better of the two. Subsidized loans don't start accruing interest until after the student graduates from college, and subsidized loans don't need to start being paid back until after the student graduates from college. Usually it's actually 6 months after they graduate, whereas unsubsidized start accruing interest immediately. And a lot of times for students, they end up paying back as much, if not more, on their student loan interest as much as they are on their actual student loans. So please keep that in mind if a student is considering taking out student loans. So there are many sources of financial aid, but the main categorizations are going to be from the federal government, the state government, the colleges and universities, and private agencies, companies, foundations, and employers. Now, the federal government, the source is really coming from the federal student aid, and all of the federal government grants and scholarships are applied through by filling out the FAFSA. So U.S. citizens and permanent residents are all able to fill out the FAFSA, and by filling out, they're going to be put into eligibility for the Pell Grant, student loans, Teach grants, stuff like that. So there's quite a few out there, and if you have any questions about certain grants that the federal government might offer, can always let me know, and I'll give you an answer on that. So in California, we also have aid that we give out. So I am a representative of the California Student Aid Commission, and our big grant is the Cal Grant. We're going to be talking about that a little bit more in detail, but we have the Cal Grant, the Middle Class Scholarship, Chafee Grant for foster youth. So we have a lot of really big grant programs ourselves. We don't administer any student loans, but we can help students along in that process and navigating any federal grants and scholarships and loans that they might get if they have any questions. But typically we ask that they reach out to whoever their loan provider is if they want some of those more in-depth details. And then for colleges and universities, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail too, but a lot of times if a student is going to the University of California, they may be considered for a Blue and Gold Scholarship, which is essentially paying tuition for the school at a UC. And then there's the California State University Grant, which is pretty much the same thing at a California State University. And then there's a lot of other grants and scholarships that can come from private universities, and a lot of these are going to be based off financial need. And then there's the private agency, companies, foundations, and employer grants, where the other three tend to lean more on financial need. A lot of times these private grants take in a component of merit. So that's going to be like essays and interviews and stuff like that. So Cal Grants, we're going to break down what the Cal Grants are. There's three, and there's a lot of different avenues each one of these awards can take, depending on which kind of schools people go to and what kind of aid a student is already receiving. So we're going to start with Cal Grant A, which for entitlement students, which are going to be your high school seniors and your recent high school grads. So if you are a student that graduated this year from high school, or if you graduated last year, you're in this entitlement cycle. And if that student has at least a 3.0 GPA and their family income and assets are below the state ceilings, and those state ceilings are actually pretty high for a Cal Grant A student. That's up for like a family size of around 6. You're talking close to $120,000 per year that a family could be making and have in assets, not including the price of their home that they live in, right? So if you own your own home, that's not factored into the equation at all. And then if they demonstrate financial need, right? So there's what we call the cost of attendance at any university or college or trade school, whatever you would like to refer to them as. And that cost of attendance is essentially how much financial need a student may need minus how much the parents can provide. And that decision is going to be based off of the FAFSA for U.S. citizens and for permanent residents, how much the parents are expected to contribute, and the California DREAM Act application for undocumented students. And then there's the Cal Grant B Entitlement Awards, which is for high school seniors and recent high school grads once again. It has a much lower GPA of 2.0, and it's for disadvantaged or low-income families, right? So these are going to be the families that have lower income. For a family size of 6, you're pushing closer to around $60,000 a year that a family can make, and its asset ceiling is pretty much under that $60,000 mark as well, not including if they own a home or own cars and stuff like that. It's more about, you know, bank accounts or any kind of valuable that's saved for the purpose of investment or holding an asset or something like that. And then they have to be able to demonstrate financial need once again. That goes into that cost of education thing. But Cal Grant B is actually administered a little bit differently than a lot of the other programs. So Cal Grant B covers tuition system-wide fees from years 2 through years 4 at any California community college, any CSU, any UC, and most of the private schools throughout California. There are a few that don't qualify based off of their cohort default rate, which is how many students default on their student loans if they take out loans, as well as their graduation rate to a degree. But for most schools, this is something that works out pretty well for those students because they can get it if they are an entitlement award student, and it covers years 2 through 4 for tuition. They'll get also a stipend years 1 through 4 as well. But it also, this is where it's going to be tricky because Cal Grant B at a California community college can be worth a lot more money than it has on its face value. So at a California community college, if a student goes there, they're automatically awarded the $1,672 that they get towards their personal expenses that they need to go to college with. So a lot of this can be applied towards books, supplies, living expenses, or whatever it might be. However, the community colleges also offer a full-time success type grant, which if a student has a Cal Grant B at a community college and they're utilizing it, they can also take 15 units or more per semester and receive an additional $2,000 per semester that goes into their pocket, right? So this can be spent on whatever they would like to have it spent on. Additionally, Cal Grant B students at a CSU, even though that first year they don't get tuition and system-wide fees, typically the CSU actually pays for that first year for those students. However, if a student goes to a UC, typically they're going to be awarded a Cal Grant A instead if they fall under that ceiling and they have a 3.0 GPA, as most UCs do require a 3.0 GPA for admittance. And typically they get that Cal Grant A, which is for 4 years of tuition and system-wide fees. And so just to kind of show between Cal Grant A and Cal Grant B, there is some complexity built in there. And there's actually further complexity for students that have dependents of their own that are under the age of 18. If a student has a Cal Grant A or B and that award is being utilized at any state school, the student, if they have a dependent under the age of 18, right, so these are going to be a lot of your younger parents, they can get an additional $6,000 per year to attend school with if they're going full-time. So, and that is a prorated amount based off their cost of education. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there is a lot that goes into each one of these programs, and a lot of schools base additional programs based off of these awards. So please take that in consideration if you're considering going to any kind of school, that there's probably going to be different packaging requirements built into these Cal Grants. And then for Cal Grant C, this is for pursuing vocational programs of study. There is no minimum GPA. Anyone applies for it, and it's through what we call a competitive cycle. And typically, we end up having enough awards to go around for most students that are pursuing a vocational program. Yeah, so if you have any questions on that, please let me know. So the Middle Class Scholarship is another award that's kind of like the Cal Grant. It's kind of for families that make just a little bit too much for Cal Grant typically. Now, it is possible for a student to get both a Middle Class Scholarship and a Cal Grant, but it's pretty rare. The Middle Class Scholarship is for families that have income and assets up to $177,000 a year who submit their FAFSA or DREAM Act application by the March 2nd deadline, just like with Cal Grant, right? So both Cal Grant and the Middle Class Scholarship considerations are based off of submitting one of those applications by March 2nd. So it's really important to submit those applications by March 2nd. Even if the student is like unsure if they're going to go to college the next year, they should still get that application in. The Middle Class Scholarship can be only used at a University of California or a California State University. And more recently, there's actually been an extension for California community colleges that offer a bachelor's program, right? So if a student is receiving coursework in a bachelor's program at a California community college, there's few of them, so it's rare, but they can also get a Middle Class Scholarship attending those schools as well. So the requirements further are they have to be a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or have AB 540 status. Now, AB 540 status is going to be built on for a lot of those undocumented students, but please keep in mind that AB 540 status has extended from what it used to be, right? So AB 540 status used to be just for in-state tuition, and it's been progressed over the years through 3 other pieces of legislation that have extended the eligibility. So please take a look into that if that is something that you think you can apply for as a undocumented student. And it's for California residents, so you have to have established California residency and maintain at least a 2.0 GPA in the college that you're going to, right? So you can't fall out of what we call satisfactory academic progress. You have to stay within that satisfactory academic progress, which is going to be determined by each different school. But typically the baseline is you have to be taking enough units to graduate in what they consider reasonable, and you have to have at least a 2.0 GPA. And the award amounts, they're to be determined by the California Student Aid Commission. Now, the Middle Class Scholarship is one of those financial aid awards that comes later in the packaging. So what that means is typically you as a student would get a lot of different awards first, and then it would go back and see if you still had financial need to be awarded the Middle Class Scholarship. And this would be between 10 and 40% of a student's need at a California State University or University of California. So there's a California Chafee grant. The Chafee grant is a program that provides $5,000 per year. Oh, we have a question. So what is the income ceiling for Cal Grant C? That's a great question. So the income ceiling for Cal Grant C is going to be the exact same as what it is for Cal Grant A. So it's really depending on, and for all the Cal Grants, it's depending on how big the family size is and what the GPA is to see if you're in the qualification. And so I'll also be sending over the ceiling chart so you can take a more concerted look at what those ceilings are, of course. So moving on to the Chafee program, the California Chafee Grant Program provides up to $5,000 annually to current and former foster youth for college vocational training at any accredited college in the U.S. based on available funding. Now, this just had a huge increase in funding recently, and it also had an increase in age. So most of the time, you had to be at least 23 years old and be in foster care at least one day between the ages of 16 and 18 years old. But that has recently extended to a student can be up to 26 years old and still be receiving the Chafee grant, right? So, but it can only be awarded for up to 5 years, right? So it's up to $5,000 a year for 5 years. And foster youth are encouraged to apply during their senior year of high school. They have to fill out the California Dream Act application or the FAFSA, and they have to fill out the Chafee grant application as well. So they have to do both of them. But after a student that's a foster youth fills out a Chafee application, for the first time, they do not have to do the Chafee application again. However, they have to fill out the FAFSA or the California Dream Act application every year before they go into the college the next year. So they should definitely be making sure that they're filling out their financial aid applications every single year. And to apply for Chafee grant, you just have to go to the Chafee grant website, which is chafee.csac.ca.gov. Okay, so institutional grants. So if a student is going to a University of California, there's the Blue and Gold Scholarship. Now this handles tuition and system-wide fees at any UC. And so the tuition and system-wide fees is actually a really important thing because that's the cost of going to class, right? That's the cost of your teachers instructing to the students and all of that information being obtained. It's the kind of conventional sense of what we think about when we think about going to college. So those are going to be those big costs. That's going to be the exact same thing for the California State University grant. And this is going to be based, once again, off of financial need, much like with the Cal grant. But it's also going to be based off of what other awards a student might have, right? So a student may get a Cal grant and not get a university grant of some kind, whether it's the Blue and Gold Scholarship or the Cal State University grant, because they don't have that financial need for their tuition and system-wide fees. Additionally, at a University of California, the system as a whole believes that there's a need that the students have to bring towards their own education, so a financial requirement, and it usually looks about $10,000. So if the cost of education at a University of California is determined to be an inclusive package of about $35,000, usually they think that $25,000 should be covered by the combination of scholarships, grants, and stuff like that, as well as parents' contribution. And then the remaining $10,000 to be through either loans or working or things like that. And one of the caveats to that is that if a student actually goes and when they're filling out their applications, they apply for private scholarships, the universities of California actually count that towards the money they're bringing to the table, so towards that $10,000. So please keep that in mind. And that's a really important thing to consider for these students, because sometimes that's a big cost that they're not necessarily thinking of. That's part of their expected package, right? So, and that's usually going to come towards like their living expenses and stuff like that. Usually tuition and system-wide fees aren't factored in here. Usually that's going to be covered if the student has financial need. Otherwise, a student may have to have a part-time job or take out some loans. That is a reality of some student circumstances. And then the California Community College Promise Grant. It's a pretty important one as well. So there's actually the California Community College Promise Grant, which is formerly known as like the BOG fee waiver, and it's since changed, what it's called now, which is the Promise Grant. But essentially what it does now is that it offers students who are of a lower income free community college, right? So not paying the fees to take classes at a community college. But something that has since extended is the addition of the California Community College Promise Program. This is a little bit different. The Promise Program is for any student for the first 2 years they're at the community college, as long as they're enrolled at least 12 units, they get their school paid for, right? So it doesn't matter about financial need at that point. It more matters about enrollment. And this was an incentive to get students through the community college process faster. So it really shouldn't matter how much a family makes. They should still be filling out either the FAFSA or the California Dream Act application. So it's really important to do one of those two applications regardless of the financial need of any family. And do we have any questions about that? All right, we're going to move on. So a lot of times we get questions about which application should I fill out. And so we'll also send out this this piece right here so you can take a look at which application a student should be filling out. But the general rule of thumb is that if a student is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, they're going to be filling out the FAFSA with a few exceptions, right? So if a student has an I-94 record, which is mainly in reference to refugee status, if they're a refugee, they'd be filling out the FAFSA. If they're a citizen of Palau, the Marshall Islands, or the Federated States of Micronesia, they need to be filling out a FAFSA as well. And if they hold a T visa, they need to be filling out the FAFSA. However, if a student is undocumented, they really need to start out at the DREAM Act application. Now, there are some additional requirements in order to fill out the DREAM Act application, but they're going to be taken through on the application itself. It has skip logic to determine if the student is able to fill out a DREAM Act application. And we never want to self-select a student out. We want to make sure that they have the opportunity to take a look at the requirements, as they are a little more complicated than they were in the past, but they're also more flexible with the students. So a student has more ability to qualify for the DREAM Act application now than they have ever before, but it's just a little complicated. So we highly recommend that a student takes a look at that and make sure that they qualify for that and fill out the application and make that determination themselves and not just be discouraged from filling it out because they feel like they might not qualify for the DREAM Act application. And if you have any questions about that, please reach out to me. You can either, reach out to me personally, or if you can type in the group chat, or, unmute yourself and share a comment. So before starting the FAFSA, or the FAFSA on the web is what we normally would refer to it as, the student's going to have to gather certain information. And that's going to be the student's driver's license. Now, it's not something needed. If a student does not have a driver's license, that's okay. But if they have one, they should be bringing it. Same thing with the student's alien registration card if they have one. Now, U.S. citizens won't have an alien registration card. For most students filling out a FAFSA, they're going to need their Social Security cards, their 2018 W-2 forms, and records of money earned and other taxable benefits. So this is going to be a lot of times the federal income tax forms as well, being the 1040s. It's going to be a little bit different than in years past, but on both the DREAM Act application and the FAFSA, there'll be instructions on which areas need to be entered where onto the application based off those tax forms, right? And then records of untaxed income are important. Current bank statements, this is once again going to take in the asset function to determine eligibility. If your family owns a business, a farm, or other real estate records, it's really important for them to have that. And records of stocks, bonds, or other investments. It's all going to be taken into consideration. Okay, we have a question. I had a question about the scholarships of community college. You said a student should fill out a FAFSA, and the other one was the California DREAM Act application if they're an undocumented student, right? So the FAFSA is for just U.S. citizens and permanent residents with a few exceptions, and an undocumented student should be filling out the DREAM Act application. So the California DREAM Act application is the other one. And then we have another question. Does the California Promise Program affect the limit on the maximum period of time that you can receive direct subsidized loans through FAFSA? So the California Promise Program is actually, it doesn't affect the limit because it is a requirement for the student to be enrolled in a certain amount of units to progress through the degree, right? So if anything, it actually does the opposite of that. Because in order to receive any kind of financial aid, and that includes loans, subsidized loans in particular from the federal government, a student has to be making satisfactory academic progress. Now, the one part everyone knows about satisfactory academic progress is the GPA, that you have to have at least a 2.0 GPA for most institutions. An institution could go, no, you don't meet our SAP policy, we have it at 2.5, and you don't get your loans, you don't get your grants, you don't get anything because you don't meet our SAP requirement, but most schools is a 2.0. However, the part that most people don't know about satisfactory academic progress is the timeliness to a degree completion, right? So a lot of times we have what we consider professional students in a sense that they're in school for a very long time, but they have to be making progress towards their degree. And that's going to be based off each school's internal SAP policy. And if they're not making progress towards their degree, they will fall out of SAP. So once again, they'll fall out of satisfactory academic progress, and they won't be eligible for financial aid at that point. So the California Promise Program, the way that it actually affects it is that it helps the student get through their program quicker. So although I guess you could say that technically a student could be making satisfactory academic progress by going less than full-time, and therefore could receive more subsidized loans, it's highly recommended that if the student has the ability to go full-time and succeed, that they do so, and that they stay in good standing. That way, they're almost guaranteed to, as long as they're passing their classes, and they're able to get the subsidized loans as needed. So I hope that answers that question, and if I can provide any further detail, please let me know. And then, so beyond bringing just those different things to fill out the application, it's really important to know that they need to create a file for all of this information and keep it secure, because a lot of these documents are documents that are vulnerable, right? So we don't want people to find Social Security cards. We don't want people to know your income information, because this can be used, and it has been used, to hack, use identity theft, things like that. So it's really important to keep this information secure. So we say, keep it all in a single folder, or keep it under a secure device or something like that is not easily hackable, because if you're filling out these applications and someone's aware of that and they have less than good intent for your finances, they'll take advantage. So please make sure that you're keeping all this information secure. And if they're going to a Cash for College workshop or a different financial aid workshop and the student's keeping this information, make sure that they're well aware to keep it safe. Okay, so the FAFSA has 7 sections on the form, and this is going to be very similar to the California DREAM Act application. And those 7 sections are going to be the student demographics, the school selection, the dependency status, parent demographics, financial information, the sign submit section, and confirmation. So we're going to move we're going to talk real quick about the first 3 sections, and then we're going to go more detail about sections 4, 5, and 6. So for student demographics, this is the big mistake that happens with almost every student, right, that has a mistake on their application. It is the thing that we want to make sure every student gets right. It's their name, right? Their names are going to look oftentimes very different between their college applications, their financial aid applications, the GPAs that are uploaded to the commission that are coming from the high school the student attends. We need to make sure that the student's name across all these different formats is consistent. So for me, an example, my name is Michael Wagner. However, I go by my nickname, which is Billy. So if I'm entering Billy Wagner on my school app, and on my financial aid app, I'm putting Michael Wagner, and then on my college apps, I'm putting William Wagner, it's going to be very difficult for the schools to be able to package me an award, right? Because they need to match everything. And then if I provide my identification to prove who I am to the school, and they're seeing William Wagner and my identification says Michael Wagner, it's just going to make the process harder. Now, it's not to say that we can't fix this if this is something that comes about, but it's really important for the students to have whatever name is on their social or on their driver's license or whatever they have that is an identification that is standard that they can use and show to someone proving their status and who they are, that they use that name consistently across all formats. So when they're filling out the applications, whether it be the college apps, the financial aid apps, and confirming with the school that they go to, that is indeed their name and how they spell it and the way they're going to put it on everything else. Now, for FAFSA students in particular, this is important that they spell their name just like it appears on their Social Security card, because their process, right, after they submit a FAFSA, is going to go through Social Security, which is going to match them and ensure that their application is indeed to their social number, their Social Security number. So please keep that in mind. And then for school selection, a student can list up to 10 schools at a time. And if they want to apply to more than 10 schools and have more than 10 schools receive their financial aid information, that's more than fine. After they submit the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, just give about a week for processing. They can log right back into the application. And at that point, they will be able to take out those schools and input new schools that they would like the information sent to. So based off of those applications. And then for dependency status, that's really going to be handled on the application. So who is considered a parent on the application? Now, this is for the FAFSA and the DREAM Act application. Now, for some students, they go to like a Stanford or something like that, and although they do need to fill out a FAFSA or a DREAM Act application, they would also have to do something like the CSS profile, or there's a lot of different applications that a private university that might take into consideration too. But who is considered? For the most part, it's going to be biological or adoptive parents. This includes same-sex parents, and this includes unmarried parents that are living together, right? So even if they are divorced and they're living together, they are considered parents of the dependent student on the application. As long as the student is under the age of 24, as well as a few other things that will come into consideration as far as determining dependency status. But from that point, they're just going to have to take a look into if the student's parents are divorced or separated and they don't live together, the student needs to provide information about the parent who the student lived with more over the past 12 months, right? And sometimes we get, it's an even split. I live with mom and dad equally, right down the middle. And then at that point, it's really dependent on like, well, who provides more clothing support or who provides, gas to get to school and back. It's really going to be minute at that point, but the student needs to do their best job at determining which parent actually supports them the most. And then this is a really important part as well, step parents. So if the dependency, the parent that's considered the parent of the student for financial aid purposes is remarried, the step-parent, regardless of any prenuptial agreements, if currently married to the student's custodial parent, has to be listed on the application as well. For financial aid purposes, that is considered the parent. So, when filling out a FAFSA, we always recommend using the IRS data retrieval tool. It makes things go a lot faster, and it can just really make sure that everything goes smoothly. Additionally, if a student gets called for verification, everything is already in system for them. It's actually less likely they're going to be asked for verification from a California community college or from a CSU, UC, or private university in the state of California, because they know, the financial aid offices know, that information was taken directly from the IRS. So if a parent has the ability to use the IRS data retrieval tool, we highly recommend that they do so. Okay, so for sign and submit, recommend that students sign the FAFSA electronically using their FSA ID, and parents as well. So both the students and parents will both need to create an FSA ID. Now, although they don't have to, a parent can print the page at the end and sign it and send it in. And in fact, if a parent is undocumented and the student is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, they will have the ability to get to the end of the application, print out the parent signature page, and send it in. But if the parent has the ability to make an FSA ID electronically because they have a social, whether it's through a permanent residency card or because they're a U.S. citizen, we highly recommend that they do that, right? One caveat to that is if a social says for work purposes only, that is going to be a DACA social. And if that is a DACA social, they're going to be filling out either a DREAM Act application if it's a student that has that social, or if the parent has that, they're going to need to sign it physically and print out that signature page. However, for every other parent that has the ability to make an FSA ID and is filling out a FAFSA, it is very important to actually submit it directly, right? That's going to make processing go a lot quicker because if you're mailing it in, it can take weeks, if not months, to process a student. Sometimes for proving that the application was in on time, that's a little more difficult. If a parent or a student needs to make an amendment to their application, that once again can be a very tedious process where you have to resubmit this, resend in the paper forms with the signature on them. So please make an FSA ID if you're a parent, and the student needs to make an FSA ID as well. And they can make it at fsaid.ed.gov. And students need to sign the DREAM Act using a pen that they create. This is actually pretty easy, and parents need to create a pen as well. But this is just kind of based off the information that they provide us. It's not going through a second step of authorization to ensure that this is indeed the person that's signing. But there may be a point where it's called for verification to see if that information is needed. So please keep in mind that students that sign the DREAM Act application, it's a very easy process. So please just create the pen. There will be a signature option for the student, but we highly recommend that they don't use it. It is much easier, and there really isn't any good reason not to create a pen. And then remember to read and to mark agree to the student terms and agreement, and to actually submit the application. A lot of times we get a lot of students that are confused, and they go, well, you know, I saved my application, I got to the very end, we just didn't submit it. Is that still on time? And the unfortunate answer to that question is no, it's not on time. A student has to submit the application by March 2nd in order to be considered on time. And this is really unfortunate because I actually just got off the phone earlier, a couple days ago, with a student that submitted on March 5th or 6th and just missed the deadline, and they did it because they were waiting on their parent's signature. And unfortunately, that is a reason that can't be appealed. The appeal form can be submitted, but it won't go through. So please keep in mind the importance of submitting the application before March 2nd. So for this, the parent signature page, once again, they're going to have to sign, submit, they're going to have to agree to the terms. It's really easy for the DREAM Act application. For the FSA ID, the parents are going to have to make their own. And then parents without a social security number, once again, they can print out that the paper signature page, sign it, and send it in. But if a parent has the ability to make an FSA ID, or if they're filling out a DREAM Act application, to make a pen, we highly recommend that the parent does that instead. It's way better. And then for the confirmation page, this is going to be a list of some different information, the schools that are being applied to, the estimated Pell Grant awards. So a lot of times they do initial, right, estimations of different federal aid that a student may get. And it's a good thing to kind of take a look at. And it's really important to write down that DRN number, which is called the data release number, because this can be used to identify who you are pretty quick. So, but this is just pretty much a congratulatory page letting you know that you submitted your application successfully. It's going to let a student know what their expected family contribution is, which is how much the federal government has decided that the student should be able to pay, as well as for the California DREAM Act application, how much the state believes the student's family should pay for their education. In this particular circumstance right here, this is a 0 EFC, which means that the federal government expects the student's family to contribute no money. But if this says no EFC, not 0 EFC, not just a bunch of zeros, but it says no EFC, that means that the application was not processed correctly and that something is missing. And so it's really important for the student to go back in and make any kind of corrections to their application, because without doing so, the student will not be awarded any kind of grants or scholarships. They can only be considered for federal student loans, right? So we don't want that. We want to make sure that they're eligible for all the different types of aid. And then there's a student aid report. This is going to be sent to the students just a few days after they submit their application. After processing for the FAFSA, goes through the federal processor or through us at the California DREAM Act application for just a couple days, really. It can take up to a week, but usually it's just like a 3 to 5 day process. And it's going to give all the information that a student needs to know about what they put on their application, right? So it's going to be essentially all the answers that they gave. It's going to be emailed to them directly. Unless the student didn't listen to email on their application, then it will be mailed to them directly. So it's a really important document, and the students should really keep it because they can use it for their financial aid offices to follow up with who they are. They can show what they put on their applications. There's a lot of important information that they can provide through the student aid report. And then also, although it's not necessarily recommended, a student can make adjustments to their application by making changes on the student aid report itself and mailing it in to the FAFSA, or I'm sorry, to the federal student aid. We don't usually recommend doing that, but it is an option. So just kind of mentioning it. So for federal verification, we're not going to go through all of this, but what you need to know is that a lot of times if a student is selected for verification, because a certain amount of students will be selected for verification depending on if they're DREAMAC students or if there's something that's flagged on their application or if they're just one of the lucky students, because sometimes it's just random. But what happens is the federal government will go, this student's flagged, the college will need to follow up with those students, right? And by following up with the students, it can look like, hey, we need copies of your W-2s, your 1040s, you know, proof of your family size or how many students are in college or something like that. You know, a bunch of different things that they can ask for. It seems a little intimidating when you're asked for federal verification or college financial aid verification, depending on which school you go to. But it's really an easy process. As long as you fill out your application to the best of your knowledge, it really shouldn't be something that you worry about, because sometimes people make mistakes. And other times, they're just trying to verify that everything is correct because it is a mandate that they have to abide by. So just gather up the information that they ask of you and provide it to them in a timely fashion. And this is going to be a really important part of checking your emails. Students really need to check their emails, especially if they're over the age of 18, because it's going to fall on them to make sure that everything is keeping up and accounted for. So please keep that in mind. Creating a web grants for students is also very important. In fact, we're working on the new grant delivery system modernization project, which is essentially what this is. It's a portal for the students to be able to manage their Cal Grant awards, confirm that they graduated from high school, and at what date they graduated from high school. They let us know which school they're going to be going to, and they're going to be able to make a lot of changes and view different award amounts they're going to get through the state. So it's really important for them to make one of these accounts, being able to follow through with their to-do list, which is going to be listed on their account. And it looks a little bit different than it did in the years past. So if a student goes, hey, this doesn't look familiar to me, it's important to assure them that, hey, this is the new version of it. It's going to be a lot easier to manage things with. So just be ready that it's going to look a little bit different starting October 1st. And then how do I keep my aid? So the main thing, if you are a male student, oh, I got a question, I'm sorry. Is this web grant done after submitting FAFSA? So making a web grants, web grants for students account is done after submitting the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act application. And we usually suggest giving it about a week because that information has to be processed and given to us. That's a really great question because you cannot make one of these accounts before an application is submitted. So without having any information in, we can't process you, and you'll just get an error message when you're trying to create your web grants account. Otherwise, if you've submitted your FAFSA or your DREAM Act application, give it a week for processing, and it will be available to take a look at and be able to navigate and whatnot. So for the requirements on keeping your aid, the first and big one is for males that are between the ages of 18 and 25 have to have registered with Selective Service, right? You can register at earliest now at 17 years and 3 months old. If you are a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, you can register through the SSS.gov. And undocumented students and everyone else can also go and mail a registration form. And that form is located at the post office. You can just go and ask for it right away. If you are an undocumented student, we suggest not putting in your DACA social if you have one. It will ask for a social, but you don't have to put it down. And typically, it's not really referring to your DACA social anyways. And we just recommend not putting it down. But beyond that, if you're enrolled and accepted into an eligible institution and program of higher education, you have to stick with the requirements that they have to ensure that you're receiving the aid packages they provide you. And so that's going to look different from one place to another because of the different satisfactory academic progress requirements they might have. So it's really important to follow up with financial aid offices to make sure that you're meeting the SAP requirements, and otherwise you should be good to go in that capacity. And so continued, generally a student will need to have a grade point average of a 2.0 or higher. Once again, this can be different depending on which schools you go to. and will have to pass enough classes towards their degree to make sure that they're staying on progress to their degree, and that's going to be depending on the SAP policy at each school. So once again, please know that the SAP policy is different from school to school, and to submit your FAFSA and California DREAM Act application every year between October 1st and March 2nd. That's incredibly important to do because a lot of times students will go to a community college, they won't get a Cal grant for one reason or another, and they'll miss that March 2nd deadline for Entitlement 2, which is essentially any student that's transferring from a community college to a four-year degree. And so even though if you have a Cal grant, you may be able to apply after March 2nd, we still recommend that you get in that application before March 2nd each year that you're going to be going to college. And then, what can my financial aid be spent on? So really depending on the different grants and scholarships you get, it can be spent on tuition and fees, which is the price of going to campus and sitting down and taking class. It can be spent on room and board and books and supplies, transportation. It can be for plumbing in some cases or any other additional need that a student may have. So it's really important to understand that financial aid is earmarked for certain things a lot of times. When you see like Cal Grant A is earmarked for tuition and system-wide fees, whereas Cal Grant B has an access award which can be applied to any of these things, as well as additional aid that can come out of Cal Grant B, or Pell Grant, which can be used for anything the student needs to succeed in school, which could be living expenses. So one of the big things that we recommend, though, is that keep in mind that living expenses are, they can start adding up. And so there are some recommendations we have to spend your money wisely. And some of those are to take advantage of all the things that are provided through the school. So a lot of times the campus will have their health centers that are free to the students. This actually goes with their fees that they're paying in, and if they get their tuition and system-wide fees covered, this is a part of, they're already paying for that. So they should take advantage of that. They should use the computer labs and the Wi-Fi that they have. So a lot of times students will go and they'll purchase hotspots and stuff like that, but if they have the ability to utilize the library or to utilize the campus-wide Wi-Fi, which most campuses are moving to, they should use that. They should use the tutoring services offered on campus and transportation, which is a lot of times like a car they can take the bus or train with. They have the fitness centers that are usually free to the students if they have them at the campuses, as well as a lot of different forms of entertainment, right? So sometimes students will get a lot of discounts off of movie tickets or events, or there'll be events on campus. And we highly recommend a student take advantage of all of these as they're either already paying for them or they're going to be free to them. So for room and board, this is just a few things to go over real quick. The dorms or res halls may provide that college experience, and that college experience is great, but it does come at a cost. Usually it's only going to be for about a nine-month period that they're going to be living on campus, with winter and the springtime being kind of one of those gray areas where sometimes they can live on campus and sometimes they can't. So it can apply extra costs for residents, and if they stay during winter session or summer, it can even apply more. So keep that in mind, that a lot of times living on campus, it's great, but it does cost a little bit more typically when you're considering how much time you're actually going to be living on campus. Also, please keep in mind that meal plans typically do not offer 3 square meals a day. This is really important. I actually used to work at a university in the res halls, and I oversaw a lot of the resident advisors. And a lot of the students would come to complaints to the resident advisors going, hey, I'm out of essentially their meal passes where they can go into the dining commons and get meals from. And unfortunately, a lot of times they'd be left in the last couple months of school and they have no more meals because they used them all up. So they end up going to the food pantry and stuff like that. So it's really important to take into consideration that meal plans are going to be based off of a lot of different structures, and even some of the bigger ones don't offer 3 square meals a day for 7 days a week. So please keep that in mind. It is our recommendation that you contact the campus to better understand the housing options as well, because there may be affiliated housing around the campus that is either connected to the campus or is in some way affiliated with it, but one of the big things is we recommend that the students learn to cook. Cooking can dramatically cut down the cost of food at most campuses, and most campuses offer free cooking demos with a certified nutritionist. So not only is it like good for that, for the health aspect, but it's also really good because it's a lot cheaper than spending, the kind of average $10 per meal for the dining commons that you might have to pay. And then books and supplies, your financial aid can go towards this as well, but we also want to make sure that you know that comparing is always a good idea. So when buying or renting your books and supplies, as soon as you enroll in class, can save you quite a bit of money because you're able to compare. So if you go to like an Amazon or a Chegg type service, you can see, well, do I want to rent my books? Do I want to purchase them? Which place offers me the best price for what I'm looking at? Because a lot of times the campus bookstore is kind of at a premium. They can charge a little bit more at their bookstores. So if that's needed, then of course get your book at the bookstore. But otherwise, it's kind of good to compare. And if you need any FAFSA assistance, we really recommend you reach directly out to Federal Student Aid. And you can do that through the links that we have here, or you can call them at 1-800-433-3243, or you can email them directly and they'll get back to you pretty quickly. What I prefer personally, if I'm trying to just get in touch with someone from the FSA, I actually use their chat function. I have a few contacts that work directly with the Federal Student Aid, and sometimes I speak with them directly, and they all recommend that as well. So that chat function is usually the best way to get in touch with someone immediately. So if you have any FAFSA concerns or you need assistance, please reach out to them there. And if you have any needing assistance from us at the California Student Aid Commission, whether it's with any state programs or the DREAM Act application, you can email us at studentsupport@csac.ca.gov. You can go through our resources on csac.ca.gov, and you can look for Cash for College workshops at cashforcollege.csac.ca.gov. A lot of schools throughout the state host these Cash for College workshops, which are essentially free financial aid workshops where students and their parents can come and fill out either the FAFSA, the DREAM Act application, the Chafee Grant for Foster Youth application, and get some advice as well. So that is pretty much it. And if there are anyone that has any questions, please feel free to use that chat function or to go ahead and, yeah. All right, so does anyone have any questions? Oh, will we be able to get a copy of this presentation? Yes. Yeah. So yes, we'll definitely be providing a copy of this presentation. And I will probably just go through it to make sure that everything is good.
We will have a copy of the presentation. It'll be recorded, and it will be placed on our high school website under high school, where it says College for Everyone webinar series.
Okay. And then how about if you're, oh, go ahead.
There's one question we missed. It is, how is CDAA different than DACA?
Gotcha. So CAD, so CADA, actually it stands for the California DREAM Act application, and it differs from DACA in a huge way. Now, although they serve very similar populations, DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and that is a federal program that establishes work visas for students on a 2-year basis. Right now, just to give everyone an explanation of where DACA kind of sits, a student that has DACA status can renew their DACA status currently, but if a student does not have DACA, they cannot register for it for the first time. Now, California DREAM Act application is for financial aid. Now, although we refer to DACA recipients as dreamers and California DREAM Act application recipients and applicants as dreamers, they are not connected at all. Whatever happens to DACA has no bearings at all on what happens to the California DREAM Act application. Whereas DACA is getting more restricted, the California DREAM Act application is actually becoming more extended, right? So there's actually more eligibility for dreamers now through the California DREAM Act application there ever was before in the past, even though DACA is being restricted. So please keep in mind that they are completely separate, and whatever happens to one does not affect the other at all. And then, oh, I'm scrolling through the presentation here. We have a
There's
question
a
up.
couple.
How about it?
There's like, sorry. I was going to
go
say
ahead.
there's two more questions. There's two more questions that came up. I just didn't know if you were looking at the chat box while you were talking.
Oh, of course. So we have a question saying, how about if you're applying to an out-of-state college? So all the federal aid can be used at an out-of-state college as long as it's in the U.S. If a student is a foster student, they can take their Chafee grant to an approved school outside of the state of California, and that's going to be most of them that are going to be Pell Grant eligible anyways. But when it comes to the Cal Grant, the Middle Class Scholarship, the Blue and Gold Scholarship, the State University Grants, all those are going to be California-specific grants and scholarships, as well as the in-state tuition is only applicable to California and a few other states that we have agreements with. I hope that answers that question. And then we have a question: what happens to an award if a student transfers from one university to another? So if a student transfers to, it really depends on which school they're transferring from and which school they're transferring to. But for a general basis, they will be able to retain that award as long as they have financial need. So sometimes we see that a student transfers, and this is rare, from one campus that's Cal Grant eligible to another campus that's Cal Grant eligible, but they run out, like the other campus is less expensive, and for that reason they're getting aid from different sources and they lose their Cal Grant, but that's incredibly rare. For the most part, you're talking about their ability to actually retain their Cal Grant as long as they're going to another Cal Grant eligible school. And that's the same thing with middle class scholarship. If they're going from one CSU to another CSU or CSU to a UC or vice versa, they'll be able to retain their middle class scholarship in most cases unless they fall out of that financial need. All right, does anyone else have any questions? I know I kind of ran through it quickly. And I, once again, just really want to say I'm really appreciative that everyone had such flexibility to come to this new format. But yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Of course.
Definitely,
yeah.
definitely information that we all need for our kids.